This is the first case I've ever heard of where a woman is accused essentially of being a hired goon to go beat somebody up.
Juliana Redding was found brutally murdered.
She was 21 years old. She had a future mapped out in the sunshine of Southern California, a life still being written. And on the night of March 15th, 2008, someone walked through her front door and took everything from her. What happened inside that small Santa Monica bungalow in the final hours of her life was violent, desperate, and deliberate. Investigators would later describe it as a fight to the death. And what they also found, all over that apartment, on every surface that mattered, was something that should have made this case straightforward. It wasn't. What unfolded over the following 5 years would shake the faith of everyone who believed in the promise of evidence. Because this is a case where the DNA was overwhelming, where the trail led directly to a suspect, where prosecutors stood before a jury convinced they had everything they needed. And still, justice never came. This is the story of Juliana Redding.
Every case leaves behind a story. Some truths stay buried. Some mysteries refuse to fade. The evidence grows cold, but the questions remain. Every crime leaves a witness.
She grew up in Tucson, Arizona, in a close, loving family. Her parents, Patricia and Greg, described her as warm, ambitious, and full of life. By the time she was 18, she had already earned her first film credit. The dream was already forming. In 2005, Juliana moved to Los Angeles, enrolling at Santa Monica College to study communications. She signed with a national modeling agency, balanced school and auditions, and took a job as a hostess to make ends meet. She made friends easily. In a city that chews through dreams, Juliana Redding had not yet been broken. But Los Angeles had a way of introducing young women like Juliana to worlds they weren't ready for. And somewhere along the way, she was introduced to a man who would change the course of everything. His name was Dr. Munir Uwaydah. Even the description of him sounds like a character from a film. He was Lebanese-American, in his early 40s. He had completed his medical training at the American University of Beirut and then gone on to study at Stanford. He held active medical licenses in 6 American states. He had built a network of clinics across Southern California and, by any outward measure, appeared to be exactly what he presented himself as, a successful, sophisticated, internationally connected surgeon at the height of his career. The lifestyle matched the image. There was a horse farm in Germany, at least one property in Beverly Hills, a house by the beach, real estate scattered across multiple countries. He spoke 4 languages, Arabic, French, English, and Spanish. He moved through rooms with confidence, the kind of man who arrived in any environment and immediately seemed to belong there. Attorneys who had dealt with him in court described the impression he made. One recalled the horse farm, the beach house, the Beverly Hills property, and what she called simply the whole status of a renowned surgeon in the community. Impressive, she said, very impressive. That was what the world saw. What lay beneath that polished exterior? The alleged fraud, the manipulation, the violence prosecutors would one day attribute to his orbit. None of that was visible yet. Not to the people he worked with, not to the patients who trusted him, and certainly not to a 20-year-old from Arizona who was still figuring out how to survive in one of the most expensive cities in the world. Juliana Redding met Dr. Uwaydah, and he offered her a job. She had no formal medical training, but he hired her anyway and paid her well. A white Range Rover came with the arrangement. Friends noticed immediately. They laughed about it, the way you laugh when someone you know suddenly has a life that looks like a different movie to your own. Juliana, who had been stretching every dollar just to get by in Santa Monica, was now moving in circles she had never moved in before. And then the relationship became something more. She ended up living in his house for a while. What had begun as employment became something that felt, to her at least, like a real relationship. She told her parents that Munir was no longer just her boss. She seemed happy. She seemed settled. She didn't know yet what she was walking into. Around the time of Juliana's 21st birthday, she took a trip with Uwaydah to Las Vegas. Birthdays in Las Vegas, a luxury hotel, a man she had come to trust. It should have been a celebration. Instead, it was the night Juliana found out the truth, that Dr. Munir Uwaydah was a married man, that he had a wife back in Lebanon, that he had 3 children, that he had maintained this entire hidden life throughout every moment they had spent together and had never once told her. Think about what that moment must have felt like. Not just the betrayal of the relationship, but the sudden, destabilizing realization that the man she thought she knew, the surgeon, the house, the Range Rover, the sophistication, had been constructed around a lie at its very center. The confrontation that night was furious. By the next morning, Juliana and her girlfriends had moved to a separate hotel room. The following day, they flew home. And that, Juliana decided, was the end of it. She had been lied to. She was done. What she couldn't have known, what none of us could have known, was that walking away from Munir Uwaydah would have consequences she never saw coming. Because Uwaydah was not finished with the Redding family. During the relationship, Juliana had introduced him to her father, Greg, a pharmacist from Arizona. Uwaydah had pursued a business deal with Greg to develop pharmaceutical pain creams. The proposition was presented as lucrative. Greg Redding took it seriously. He had lawyers look into it. And the more they examined Uwaydah's medical operations, the more uncomfortable the picture became. The company involved didn't appear to be properly licensed. Greg grew concerned that what he was being asked to participate in was not entirely legal. On March 10, 2008, he sent a formal letter to Uwaydah. The deal was off. 5 days later, his daughter was dead. On March 16, 2008, Juliana stopped responding to calls and messages. Her father contacted the Santa Monica Police Department and requested a welfare check. Officers arrived at her bungalow on Centinela Avenue. What they found inside told an immediate story of violence. Juliana had been beaten and strangled. The gas stove had been left on. A candle had been lit nearby. The implication was chilling. Whoever had done this had not fled in panic. They had lingered. They had made a deliberate attempt to burn the apartment and destroy everything inside it. It hadn't worked. Inside, the evidence of a struggle was everywhere. And the killer, whoever they were, had left DNA on almost every surface that mattered. It was on Juliana's clothing, on a broken plate in the sink, on her mobile phone, and most critically, on her throat, at the precise location of the strangulation. This was not a crime without a trace. This was a scene saturated with biological evidence from a single, identifiable source. The question was not whether they would find the killer's DNA. The question was whose it was. In the early stages of the investigation, attention naturally fell on the people closest to Juliana. There was a sometime boyfriend, a man named John Gilmore, whose volatile behavior her father had previously warned her about. Police questioned him, but Gilmore produced an alibi, a house party several miles away with friends, and investigators were unable to place him at the scene. Then there was Uwaydah himself, but the DNA recovered from that apartment did not match him. It matched a woman. That single fact changed the entire direction of the investigation. Detectives turned their attention to Uwaydah's inner circle. The DNA profile was from a female, someone who had been in direct, sustained physical contact with Juliana. Someone who, according to the evidence, had put their hands around her throat. What they found was a woman named Kelly Sue Park. On paper, she appeared entirely unremarkable. A real estate broker and financial assistant. A businesswoman. No criminal record of any kind. But prosecutors would allege she was something else entirely. That Uwaydah had employed her not only in a professional capacity, but as his enforcer. Someone paid, according to court documents, to use threats, intimidation, and bullying to protect his business interests and collect his debts. According to those same documents, Uwaydah himself had a name for her. He called her James Bond. She stood close to 6 feet tall and, as one legal analyst noted at the time, was precisely the kind of person who could walk into a room and catch people off guard, because she looked nothing like what the word enforcer typically conjures. Investigators needed her DNA, but they couldn't simply ask for it. A formal request would alert her. So they did what good detectives do. They followed her. They watched. They waited. And at some point, Kelly Sue Park discarded a cigarette. Officers quietly collected it. The sample went to the lab. When the results came back, investigators were looking at something remarkable. Every significant DNA sample recovered from Juliana Redding's apartment, from the front door, from the phone, from her clothing, from the broken plate in the sink, and from her throat, matched the DNA profile extracted from that single cigarette butt. Every single one. Kelly Sue Park had allegedly never met Juliana Redding in her personal life. There was no social connection, no shared history, no innocent explanation for why her DNA would be in that apartment. No innocent explanation at all. The motive, prosecutors believed, had been in front of them from the beginning. Greg Redding's letter pulling out of the business deal had been sent on March 10th. 5 days later, Juliana was dead. According to the prosecution's theory, Uwaydah, furious at losing a key business arrangement, had dispatched Park to Juliana's apartment. Not necessarily to kill her, they alleged, but to intimidate her, to use her as leverage against her father, to send a message. But Juliana Redding, by every account, was not someone who would have submitted to intimidation quietly. Prosecutors alleged that the situation escalated when she fought back, that what began as a confrontation became something far worse. The financial picture added further weight to the prosecution's theory. According to court documents, Park was allegedly paid $250,000 approximately 3 weeks before Juliana was killed. In the days just prior to Park's eventual arrest, members of her family allegedly received an additional payment of over $100,000. Both sums were alleged to have come from Uwaydah. Over an 18-month period, prosecutors said, Park received more than $1 million from Uwaydah's company, a figure they argued was wholly incompetent with any legitimate employment arrangement. On March 17, 2010, 2 years after Juliana's murder, Kelly Sue Park was arrested. Bail was set at $3.5 million. Someone paid it. Prosecutors believed it was Uwaydah. They were unable to prove it in court. As for Uwaydah himself, he vanished. In late June of 2010, shortly after Park's arrest and as investigators sought him for questioning, he left the country. He had properties across the world. He had accounts in Beirut. He had the means, the connections, and apparently the intention to disappear completely. He was never charged in connection with Juliana Redding's death. The trial finally began in May 2013. 5 years had passed. Juliana's family came to court every day and sat through every detail. The prosecution's case opened with what many observers believed was an unassailable DNA argument. Park's DNA was on the front door, on the locks, on Juliana's mobile phone, on the front and back of her t-shirt, on her throat. Even a fingerprint on the broken plate in the sink had come back as belonging to Kelly Sue Park, and it contained her blood. Former prosecutor Alan Jackson, who had initially presented the case, put it plainly. The DNA in this case very clearly pointed in one direction. The defense countered with a theory of secondary transfer, that DNA from Park could have been carried to the crime scene indirectly via items she had touched in Uwaydah's home, which Juliana had also spent time in. They reminded the jury that Park had no history of violence, no criminal record, and no established connection to Juliana. They told the jury that unanswered questions remained. There was also the matter of a witness who did not take the stand. A woman named Melissa Ayala, a former girlfriend of John Gilmore, had allegedly told an investigator hired by the defense that Gilmore had become violent on one occasion when she raised Juliana's death, allegedly saying, "You want to see how she felt?" before choking her. Gilmore was later convicted of domestic violence against Ayala. The defense had hoped her testimony would point the jury toward a different suspect. But Ayala withdrew before trial, and the judge ruled that without her, no evidence pointing to an alternative perpetrator could be admitted. The jury was left with the DNA and the competing theories. They deliberated for more than a week. When the verdict came, the courtroom erupted. Family members and friends of Juliana screamed. They wept. They called Park a murderer and told her to go to hell. Deputies had to physically restrain people as Park was hurried out through a rear exit. The jurors had already been led out a different way. Kelly Sue Park was found not guilty, first of first-degree murder, then, after additional deliberations, not guilty of second-degree murder as well. She gasped and wept as each verdict was read aloud. Juliana's parents issued a statement afterwards. It read, in part, "Our family is deeply saddened and shocked. We believe the evidence against the defendant is enormous and that justice has not been served." There was no explanation from the jury. They were never formally interviewed. No one could say with certainty why 12 people looked at DNA on a dead woman's throat and concluded it wasn't enough. Even Park's own defense attorney, after the acquittal, said publicly that he hoped someone would one day find out who had really killed Juliana Redding. The story did not end there. It rarely does when money and power are involved. 2 years after the murder acquittal, Park was arrested again, this time as part of a massive fraud investigation. She and more than a dozen associates were indicted in connection with an alleged scheme to defraud insurance companies out of $150 million. The scheme centered on Uwaydah's medical clinics, where prosecutors alleged that nearly 24 patients were told Uwaydah would perform their surgeries, only to be operated on, while under general anesthetic, by a physician's assistant with no medical school training. 21 patients sustained lasting injuries. Many required further procedures. Some suffered psychological harm that never fully healed. As for Uwaydah, there was briefly news that he had been arrested in Germany in connection with the fraud indictment and was awaiting extradition. Then came a statement that seemed almost too fitting for a man who had evaded accountability at every turn. Prosecutors announced that Uwaydah was not, in fact, in custody. His whereabouts were unknown. "We were told by the appropriate authorities he was in custody," said the district attorney's spokeswoman. She could not comment further. He had slipped away again. As of the last confirmed public reports, Munir Uwaydah was believed to be living abroad, free, with the family he kept entirely secret from Juliana Redding throughout the time they were together. There are cases that restore your faith in justice. Cases where evidence leads to conviction, where a verdict brings some measure of peace to the people left behind. This is not one of those cases. Juliana Redding was 21 years old. She had driven west from Arizona with the kind of optimism that only the young can fully sustain. She had enrolled in college, signed with a modeling agency, made friends, built a life. She was, by every account, someone who deserved the future she was reaching for. She walked, unknowingly, into a world where a wealthy and powerful man viewed her family as assets to be leveraged and debts to be collected. And when her father tried to do the right thing, when he looked at a business arrangement that didn't seem legal and said no, someone, allegedly, came to his daughter's door. The DNA evidence said who that someone was. The jury said it wasn't enough. No one has ever been convicted of killing Juliana Redding. No one has ever been held criminally accountable for what happened inside that small bungalow on Centinela Avenue on the night of March 15, 2008. And the man prosecutors believed ordered it all has not faced trial for her death and remains, as far as public record confirms, beyond the reach of American justice. For her parents, Patricia and Greg, that is the reality they have lived with for more than 15 years. The evidence was there, the science was clear, and still, their daughter's name has never had justice attached to it. Some cases don't get a resolution. They get a verdict. And sometimes those two things are not the same. Juliana Redding deserved better than this. Her family still does. If this case moved you, please consider leaving a like. It genuinely helps more people find stories like this one. Share it with someone who follows true crime, and if you haven't already, subscribe to Cold Witness so you don't miss what's coming next. Every case we cover is one that deserves to be remembered, and there are more still to tell. We'll see you in the next one.